When fentanyl was first developed in the 1960s, it was hailed as an extremely effective painkiller. It remains in the World Health Organization's list of necessary drugs. But the drug moved out of pharmaceutical companies into garage labs and onto the streets. In 2016, 20,000 Americans died of fentanyl overdoses. One of them was the musician Prince. A toxicology report obtained by the Associated Press earlier this week showed that he had nearly 68 milligrams of fentanyl per liter of blood. Fatal levels have been recorded as low as 3 milligrams. And in New York City, an alleged drug kingpin was charged Tuesday with flooding the area with enough fentanyl to kill about 10 million people. Francisco Queiroz Zamora is charged as operating as a major trafficker after 44 pounds of fentanyl were seized last year. Officials say last year in New York City alone, more than 1,400 fatal overdoses were tied to fentanyl. Joining me to talk about the dangers of fentanyl and how to combat addiction is Melissa Moore of the Drug Policy Alliance of New York and Tino Fuentes, a harm reduction consultant and a former user and dealer. Welcome to you both. Thank you for being with me.
Thank you for having us.
So Melissa, let's start with this question of what is fentanyl and why is it so dangerous?
So as you mentioned, fentanyl was originally developed as a very effective painkiller. It was used in surgeries starting from the 1960s. And around the 1990s, pharmaceutical companies were able to develop a patch release function of it. But really, it's only been in the last decade or so that we've seen the transition being made, really as the market is responding to demand overall, as people are seeking out various forms of opioids, that it's really gone into the illicit market more.
Tino, can I ask you, how did you get involved with fentanyl?
Well, I mean, fentanyl has been around for a while, but I think maybe about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago, the overdose rates, particularly in the Bronx, started going up more because of fentanyl. And at the agency that I worked at the time, San Antonio Corner of Harm Reduction, we were trying to figure out a way how to make this safer, right? Or a way to get around so many overdose. So we started buying test strips, fentanyl test strips that are originally used by a doctor for urine, and we started getting those so that people who use drugs could test their drugs to see if they have fentanyl in it.
Because people who are buying drugs in the street, not fentanyl, but perhaps heroin or cocaine.
Heroin, right. And right, one of the things is that in the media is portrayed as almost like only heroin, right? I've tested MDMA, crystal meth, cocaine, fake oxys, fake Xanax, I mean, all positive for fentanyl. So it's streaming into everything. But for the people that don't use opioids, and let's say they use coke, I mean, they need to be careful also, right? Because it's getting into almost every drug supply that you got to cut to.
And of course, you don't know how much, you don't know what the drug is you're buying is cut with. You don't know if it's got fentanyl in it, and you don't know what concentration of fentanyl it's got.
Right, so that's part of the strips, right? The strips won't tell you the concentration. It won't even tell you what type of fentanyl. I mean, it covers fentanyl, carfentanil, like 9 other analogs. But unfortunately, it won't tell you how strong it is or what type of fentanyl. But with that, we work on safer use, right?
So Melissa, when did fentanyl really begin to become a problem on the street, and how has it accelerated or grown?
So this is something that we've seen as there have been well-intentioned sort of crackdowns and limitations on people's access to various other forms of opioids. The market is going to respond to that, right? That's why supply
side. So there's a void? Right.
Supply side doesn't work. So there's been this pivot now to where fentanyl is being cut into a large amount of the supply that's coming into the United States from overseas. It's really happening at that level. And as Tina was saying, people don't necessarily know that it's in the supply that they're getting when they're buying their substance on the street.
Where is illicit fentanyl made?
More often than not, it's actually manufactured in China, according to the DEA's own reports. So it's really coming in from outside of the country. And that's why, as Tina was saying, really the harm reduction approach is the most effective, because we're never going to effectively block out every possible way in which this is coming into our country. It's much more effective and responsive to the people who are the most at risk of overdose, to equip them with the information that they need in terms of knowing this is in the supply, and also the public public health interventions that have been proven to work, like giving people access to naloxone, safer consumption spaces where people are using in a monitored space, so if there is an overdose, that can be reversed right away.
It can be dealt with.
And connecting them in with other services and treatment, like low access, low threshold buprenorphine and methadone. So if somebody does want to transition off of their use, they're able to do that right away.
So Tino, you're now a harm reduction counselor, but you did have a part of your life where you were both an addict and a dealer.
I was a user and an adult drugs.
You an opioid user?
Yes.
And for some of our audience that doesn't understand the path, how did you come to that place?
So what you hear most of the time, right, is like the gateway drug. There was no gateway drug. I didn't start using heroin until I started dealing heroin, and it was just to make sure that my product was better than the next person's product.
Right. And so you had not gotten into opioids through, as some people do, through an accident or something?
Yeah, the medical profession, no.
No. What was that?
No marijuana, no. Just.
And in a lot of cases, actually, according to government data, most people who make that transition haven't acquired the prescription for those opioids from their own doctor. They get them from another source, or it's been shared with them or something like that. So that's another reason why clamping down just at that level won't necessarily get to the root causes of the crisis.
And Tina, what do you see happening now in that community, the people that you're working with?
What I see happening, I can tell you what I would like to see happening, more funding for harm reduction, safe injection facilities, or like they call them in Europe, drug consumption rooms, better access, easier access to treatment. I mean, all the things that we're pushing away from is what we need, right? Everything that the government is fighting against is what we need. I mean, we're trying to keep people alive.
So you're seeing more policing and more criminality.
No, more policing is not needed. The war on drugs.
No, I'm saying, but you're seeing more policing and more criminality around this, and rather than trying to deal with.
Right, we're amping up this war on drugs now. I mean, instead of, it hasn't worked, right? And that's the approach that at least the government's coming at it.
Why is it that, we know that opioids are very addictive, but why is this drug in particular so addictive?
It's less about the addictive nature of fentanyl and more so, as Tina was saying, the fact that people don't know that they're ingesting it, and because it is more powerful, that the window of time where somebody can respond to the overdose when it involves fentanyl is actually quite a bit shorter than it is with normal heroin.
What's the motive for a drug dealer or a drug supplier to cut his drugs with fentanyl? It's
cheaper to produce than a derivative of the actual plant because it's a synthetic, and most of the time this is happening, as we said, overseas and not necessarily known to the people who are distributing the drugs here, so that it's an information gap that ends up leading to a lot of loss of life that's really problematic.
Is there, obviously we've seen a tremendous number of deaths, and we've all seen pictures of people who have literally collapsed on the sidewalk, in some cases in front of their children, after having taken these drugs. Is there, do you think, a growing understanding of the lethality of these drugs, or is that still a piece that needs to be put into place?
Go ahead.
I mean, the people that are using,
yes.
I still run across some people that don't know what fentanyl is, right? But I'm on the street a lot, right? And sometimes the information doesn't get down there as quick as it should. There are people that know, and that's part of what I do, right? Is to show people if you're, say you're dependent on heroin, and you're going through withdrawals, right? And that's the only bag you have.
You're
9
going to
times
use
out of 10, you're not going to throw it out, right?
Right. You're going to use it.
Right. So my thing is to show you how to use it safer.
Right.
Right.
And when we're talking about getting that information down at the street level to users, do people understand the lethality of this drug, and it's not too difficult to get into overdose with this drug?
Right. I think it's an ongoing public education effort. So the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene did a wonderful campaign last year where they let people know that fentanyl is in New York City, that you need to look out for it, even if you're not using opioids, right? That if you're using these other substances, it can be present as well. And that's a big part of what the harm reduction movement is letting people know about, is really making sure that people are taken care of and establishing spaces that are free of stigma, where people can feel feel like they can come in, they can talk about what they're using, what's going on, so they can get real information that's pertinent to their life so we can save their life.
So last year in New York, we had nearly 2,000 deaths from this drug. 1,700, a huge number, right. even in New York, a huge number. Given what you know about what is happening on the street and about the rates of use, is use going up or coming down? Is supply going up or coming down?
I think it seems like it's, as Tina was saying, fentanyl is being found in more and more substances and where people aren't expecting it. And so that, I think, is really driving the fact that we've seen, 6 years now of every single year an increase in the number of people who have died, now surpassing automobile accidents and homicides in New York. So I think there's still a little bit of a gap in terms of people understanding the scope of the crisis. I think that must be the case for there to be as little action as there has been. We've seen great response from the Department of Health in New York City, from other agencies, but there's so much more that could happen, especially in terms of the establishment of safer consumption spaces. They're in hundreds of cities across the world. There's not been a single overdose death in the 30 years that they've been in existence. They're a proven public health tactic. It doesn't make any sense that we don't have them now.
Right.
Melissa Moore, the Drug Policy Alliance of New York, and Tino Fuentes, thank you both.